Aloha and welcome to Where Do We Go, a podcast where we, as high schoolers, sit down with female professionals in different fields to simply talk story and share with us their experiences, advice, and overall helping us foster female leaders for the future. I'm your host, Kylie Hamamoto, and I'm so glad that you decided to join us today. To learn more about our podcast and previous episodes and speakers, visit our website at www.wegohawaii.org/listen. Our podcast is brought to you by WeGo, a nonprofit organization founded by Kylie Hamamoto with the mission to foster strong and independent female leaders. To learn more about WeGo and ways to support, visit www.wegohawaii.org for more details. Today's Where Do We Go episode is a special installment part of our Women Across Professions event. This week-long experience features leading women in fields that include business, medicine, engineering, and more to support girls in our community and giving them opportunities to gain valuable insight and mentorship. Following this interview, we hope you will join us in listening to other interviews we held and hear some of the words of other women at the forefront of their field. To learn more about Women Across Professions and to listen to other interviews, visit www.wegohawaii.org/womenacrossprofessions. In today's special installment of Where Do We Go for the Women Across Professions Conference, we are joined by Punahou sophomore Calista Yap, who will be having a conversation with Stephanie Barter of Platinum Equity. Well, hello and enjoy today's episode.
Hi, welcome to the Women Across Professions Conference. I'm Calista Yap, and I'm a WeGo co-leader. With us today is Stephanie Barter, a partner at Platinum Equity, a private equity firm based in Los Angeles, California. Ms. Barter, thanks so much for joining us today. So many of our club members have expressed interest in the field of business, so I'm sure you'll be offering a valuable experience. So let's get started. So for our viewers who don't know, can you give a brief explanation of private equity?
Of course. And Calista, let me start by saying thank you very much for interviewing me today. I think my route to private equity is an interesting story, and I'm always happy to help direct folks who are thinking about where to go next in their careers and help point them in an area that has made me very, very happy over my 25-year career. So let's start with your first question, which is what exactly is private equity? So without being too technical on the topic, as you think about ownership structures in business, there are lots of different types of ways that companies are owned. There are public companies like those that you see on the stock market. There are private companies that are those that are owned by an individual or a set of individuals. And then there is something in the middle, which has different forms, but they are typically owned by something called an asset manager. And private equity is one of the asset classes who can own companies. So think about us as professional managers where our whole job is to use our investors' funds with an intent to buy companies and ultimately return dollars to our investors as a byproduct of the companies that we owned.
That sounds like a great explanation. Thanks so much. I've always heard about private equity growing up, but I never fully understood it. So that was really helpful. Specifically, what interests you about the field of business? What keeps you going on a day-to-day basis within your job?
Calista, I think my motivation for working in business in general and this business specifically has changed over time. In my early career, my most exciting thing about being at work and being in business was that it satisfied a couple of my sort of life interests and things that I care about. In particular, in my early career, I was very focused on knowledge and learning new things, experiencing new things, and having an opportunity to really learn as much as I possibly could in a variety of experiences. I also was very interested, and I think this is what's ultimately catapulted me into where I am today and why this still intrigues me, is I was also very interested in solving problems. Like, what is it that we can do better or differently than the way we did it before? And one of the things that's fascinating about private equity is because we don't own just a company, we own lots of companies. The opportunity to learn new things is extraordinary. In a course of a year, I can come across 200-300 different companies and have an opportunity to learn a little or a lot about many of them. And that also affords me an entrance into or a way to solve or learn about how people solve hundreds and thousands of problems across all of these companies. Those were definitely my early motivations and what made this job so fascinating. I think today my motivation changes a little because I still care about learning, and I think that learning is one of the most important things that we do to keep ourselves current. But today I'm as focused on um, one of the other elements about business that I think is as fascinating, if not perhaps more important, and that is creating a great team and helping this group of people who work with me and for me to have the same great life experiences that I have had, and to use that team to ultimately help do something good in this world. And that's one of the really interesting pivot points that has happened in, I would say, all businesses, but in general in private equity in the past, let's call it 10 years. I think there's been a wake of consciousness where people recognize that you have to do good in your, but business isn't just for business's sake, that business and ultimately helping solve some of the world's problems is actually a more aspirational achievement. And that's been a really fascinating pivot in the past, say, 10 or so years of my career, because I think now we're looking to solve problems that are able to help make other people's lives better, and that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Wow. So what was your college education like, and how much of it do you use in your current job?
Melissa, I'll share an admission, which is I'm probably one of the least educated team members in my firm at large. The normal route to working in the firm that I work in would be that an individual had some level of an engineering or a business degree, and they went on from there to get a master's and perhaps even a PhD. I didn't take that route. My route to business was very, very different. And it actually starts way before my college experience, in that I went to work at a really early age for my dad, who happened to be responsible. He was the business manager for a distributor. And in probably my I'd say by the time I was 13, I was actually working for my dad after school and summers. And I did that all the way through the day I graduated from college. And the reason that's so important is because at the same time, I was thinking that what I would do in this world was to become a teacher. So I graduated from college with an English degree, being very focused on ultimately becoming a teacher. And what I realized towards the tail end of my college education was that I actually was really good at the work that I was doing with and for my dad. And I don't think I connected those dots on how exciting a business career could be until the very end of that of my college education, at which point it was a little too late to go back and sort of restart my degree. So I ended up getting a job directly out of college in a software firm, effectively teaching customers how to use their new software package. And that was the beginning of my career in business. And I never found the time to go back and actually get my master's degree and or redo any parts of my education. But I've been fortunate in that I've lived a lot of work lives just because of the multitude of experiences that I've had over these many years. And I never really felt like I needed to go back and further improve my credentials. I think today it's a little different. I know that the job market looks at people very differently today than when I came out of school. And I suspect that if someone in your audience was interested in a private equity career at some point in time, they would have to follow a more traditional route, which is what I mentioned a moment ago, sort of a business degree, economics degree, finance type degree, plus a master's to get into a role like mine.
That's super cool to hear. And yeah, experience is really valuable, right? Um, so I think you touched on this a little already with your dad, but did you have any mentors that helped you on your journey?
Definitely. And you're right, my father was the first. My father had a lot of girls. And at the end of the day, one of the things that I really appreciate my dad is that he never took our gender into consideration for whatever job he asked us to do. I mean, at an early age, I knew how to change my oil and I helped him with every big building project he was working on. And he made it very clear to me that he didn't care about gender. What he cared about was hard work and hard work, being driven, and sort of having intensity and execution, and being able to follow through on things. That's what he cared about, and I think that's perhaps what set the foundation of who I am. That once I got into the workforce, I actually have had a couple of individuals in my life who were hugely important in my career trajectory. And I think that the concept of a sponsor or a mentor is really important because part of business is understanding the politics of what happens in a firm and how to work your way through politics. And you need somebody who's been there, done that to help you really unpack some of these puzzles. Sometimes they're complicated. And so once I got into the business world, I've actually had two gentlemen who have been great to me through my career. The first was a very early boss that I had. I was back working in my software firms, and I had a boss who he tells this story every time we get together. He asked, we were going through a very difficult time in this firm, and we were doing some layoffs, some pretty significant layoffs. And this gentleman didn't know me very well, but he was trying to figure out, of this team that he was responsible for, who who are keepers and who are people that he would ultimately have to let go. And the way he did this was by having an interactive interview in which he asked each individual to come forward and share with him what we thought about the current state of the team and how we thought we might make this organization better. And my mentor, his name is David, joked with me that I walked into his office and I filled up 3 whiteboards of ideas. And he said he knew at that moment that I was somebody that he needed to keep on his team. And for the following almost 15 or 17 years, he was instrumental in helping me navigate politics, pushing me to go take new roles that perhaps I wouldn't have thought I was qualified for, and generally just always giving a good word for me and vouching for my abilities to ensure that I got into the next level in the firm. And David retired about coming up on almost 10 years ago now, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And in his place, I ended up being so fortunate in that I had another individual who stepped in at that point in time and has done the same sort of good work with me, just ensuring that I constantly get pushed forward. Not because he said I should get pushed forward, because obviously at the end of the day, I, I've earned my steps forward on the ladder, but you always need a champion in your corner. And all three of those individuals, starting with my dad and the 2 following gentlemen, have done that for me.
That's wonderful to hear that you've had those people in your life who can support you. And that's a really funny story too. I think it emphasizes the importance of like staying curious and asking questions. So our club name, WeGo, stands for Women Empowerment and Global Opportunities. What is it like for you as a woman to hold a high level position within your organization? Does it bring specific challenges or specific things that you've had to overcome, or has it never really been an issue?
It's an interesting question because it's funny. I think that a lot has changed in business over the past 25 years, and in particular in my industry. And I share that because, as I mentioned, I my dad never really encouraged us to think about us or about who we were through our gender dimensions. Um, he didn't care that I was a young girl. A wrench was a wrench, and it needed to be used in whatever project. And so I really believe that in my formative years, I just didn't think a lot about gender as part of my own personal identification. I mean, I know that I'm a woman. I know that I clearly have certain characteristics that make me different from the males that I interact with on a daily basis, but it's just not it wasn't the basis of how I thought about myself. And I think that worked to my advantage because in my first years out of school, and even in my first years in the private equity firm that I work in, I was in a very male dominated world. The software firm that I began to work for right out of school was focused on was focused on their customer was industrial distributors. And Calista, if you think about it, an industrial distributor, this is somebody who sells bolts and, and equipment that's often used in what had been at that point in time very male dominated activities. And so here I found myself as a very young woman out of school, traveling across the country, teaching mostly men how to operate software that would help them run their business. And I effectively I had to just treat myself as if I was just like anybody else, even though I found that I was quite often the only female in the room. And that exacerbated in my beginning years in private equity. In the very early days of my career, I would say 99.9% of the time, I was the only female in the room. And so I just really didn't think a lot about gender as part of my job description. I had a job to do and it needed to get done, and it didn't really matter who I was and what I looked like. In the past 15 years, though, let's call it the second half of my career, I think being a woman in a high powered position, and in particular in the financial services industry, has taken on much more meaning. And it has taken that meaning on um, because I've come to realize that one of the things that I have an opportunity to do is I have an opportunity to help other young women come forward in a career in an industry like ours. And so I've made it part of my day-to-day thinking around how do I ensure that the members of my team get good opportunities to do the same thing in their careers that I had done for me in mine. And I won't tell you that I focus specifically on one particular demographic in my team because I don't. I care about bringing my whole team forward and making sure that they have great opportunities in their life. But clearly a special place in my heart exists for people who have backgrounds like mine and or had to suffer some of the difficulties of being different in a room of a lot of in a room of very similar people. So I push my team hard to make sure that they embrace and that they think about diversity as part of their own daily processes. I think every time you get a bunch of people who are different together in a room, you're often in a better place because you help each other think about problems differently than if everybody in the room is exactly the same.
Well, it sounds like you've been a trailblazer, and it's fantastic to hear that you're passionate about encouraging diversity and helping other people. So, what would you recommend to a high school student considering a career in private equity? I know you've touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
At the end of the day, I think a lot of people think that private equity and a lot of asset classes are just owners who are doing nothing more than trying to just make a lot of money. And look, I wouldn't minimize that in any way, shape, or form. I know that people aspire towards wealth creation, and I know that being in a business like ours in private equity is one of the routes that people can take to making money. But I think what I would encourage people to really think about as they consider a career in this industry is what kinds of experiences do you want to have and what kinds of problems do you want to solve? And if you have a desire to change the world in some way, shape, or form, meaning you have a penchant for technology and you want to help figure out how and where it can be put to use. Or maybe you want to change the world because you have an aspiration around environmental issues, whether it be sustainability or safeguarding biodiversity, whatever it is that your aspiration is, whatever it is that your passion project is, I would say to you that those things can be put to use through a vehicle like private equity, in the sense that if you have a skill set in any particular area or you have a desire to gather skills in any particular area and you get a sort of a deep enough set of experiences or education in some of these topics, they can be put to use in an industry like ours. At the end of the day, the reason our investors offer us money to invest on their behalf is because they think that we will make them a good return. And that good return comes from ultimately making businesses better. So, Calista, I know that's not a direct answer in that I'm not prescribing a particular degree or path to get to a firm like ours, but I would say that our firm is better off because we have folks who have all kinds of backgrounds and disciplines that come together in partnership with the team to look at a business, analyze it, and think about how it is that you could make the business better. If I were to offer a few direct comments on like what you should do or how you might think about it, I would say at least a couple of these, which is one, embrace the foundational skills like reading, writing, and having great mathematical capabilities are really important in an industry like ours, and you can't undermine the importance of communication. So the reason that reading and writing that they all group together, combined with good mathematical prowess, is you have to be able to convey your thoughts, ideas, and ultimately influence and win over individuals as you work your way through problems or recommend businesses to buy. So don't ignore the foundations, the foundational skills. They are actually really important in your later life. And in today's day and age, another just practical skill to ensure that you are good at, it's analytics. And I think every person who comes out of school and is well versed in both the technical aspects of how to unpack and analyze problems as well as the tools associated with them is better off, because everything we do today, in particular in our business, is about crunching data and crunching information and trying to make heads or tails out of a lot of information in order to develop a hypothesis and ultimately prove it out as part of our investment process.
Well, I'm sure all the high school students listening will be very excited to hear that all the things that we're working hard on are going to come to use later on in our life.
They are, I promise you, they definitely do.
Well, I'm sure you have a busy schedule. So thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me today. Everyone at WeGo really appreciates your generosity with your time.
I'm happy to do it.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we put an
No,
end to this
no,
conversation?
I would just say this as we exit our discussion. One of the things I love about what you're doing is, and I do believe that this is one of the ways that we move things forward in life, which is find a group of people whom you can work together to tackle issues, solve problems, and learn things together. And it sounds like that's exactly what your organization is focused on, which is wonderful.
Okay, I'll go ahead and let you go. Thanks so much for this again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Mahalo for tuning in to today's episode. We hope you were able to gain valuable insight from our wonderful speaker today. We hope you have a great rest of your day and tune in next time. This is Kylie, signing off. We'll see you in the next one.